Lady Charlotte's glove hides acid scars from her torture experiments on servants. 3 maids died with mysterious hand burns. In the basement, chemical burns on walls, acid bottles, tally marks counting victims. What monster lurked behind Victorian elegance? In this old family picture from way back in 1898, the mother's glove hides something really scary. Let me tell you this amazing story. Rachel Morrison was really good at looking at old stuff and figuring out how much it was worth. She had been to hundreds of sales where people sold old things from big houses. But this one sale at Piton Manor in England felt different from all the others. It was a foggy October morning. The mist hung around the honey-colored stone walls of this really old house from the 1600s. Rachel was inside looking at all the old furniture and family treasures in the fancy living room. Rain was hitting the windows hard, making everything feel kind of sad and spooky. There were lots of old Victorian chairs and tables everywhere. But what caught Rachel's eye was a big picture in a frame sitting on top of the fireplace. It was an old brownish photo that showed the Piton family all dressed up fancy just like rich people did back in 1898. Lord Reginald Piton stood up tall behind his wife, Lady Charlotte, who was sitting in a chair. Their 4 kids were lined up next to them, 3 daughters and 1 young boy. They all looked very proper and stiff like people did in old photos, but something about Lady Charlotte seemed really weird to Rachel. While everyone else in the family looked relaxed, well, as relaxed as you could look in those days, Lady Charlotte sat super straight and stiff. Her left hand was placed right on her lap where everyone could see it, and it was covered by a fancy black lace glove. Her right hand didn't have a glove on it at all. You could see her expensive rings sparkling, but that left hand with the glove seemed like she really wanted people to notice it, which was strange. Rachel pulled out her special magnifying glass to get a better look. Something about the shape of that glove looked really odd. It looked like there was some kind of weird bump or something wrong underneath that delicate lace. And Lady Charlotte's face looked haunting too. Her eyes had this deep sadness in them that didn't match how rich and successful the family seemed to be. Rachel decided to buy the photograph along with some other old things. She was really curious about what she had seen. Back at her workshop in London, she put the picture under her professional examination light. She used the same high-powered equipment she used to check if old items were real or fake. Now she could see it clearly. There was definitely something different between Lady Charlotte's 2 hands. The bare right hand looked normal and elegant and perfectly shaped, but the gloved left hand had a really unnatural shape to it. The glove was definitely hiding something underneath. Maybe some kind of injury or something wrong with her hand that the family didn't want anyone to see. Rachel started looking up information about how people took photos back in Victorian times. During the 1890s, rich families would hire photographers to take formal portraits. These pictures were carefully planned to make the family look as perfect as possible. If someone had any physical problems, they would hide them or cover them up with smart positioning and clothing. But as Rachel looked at the photograph even more closely, she noticed something else that was really troubling. The children's faces might have looked formally calm, but there were small signs that they were upset. The oldest daughter's eyes looked puffy like she had been crying not too long ago. The young son kept looking toward his mother's gloved hand, and he seemed scared. The most disturbing thing was a small dark stain on Lady Charlotte's white dress sleeve, right above the wrist of her gloved hand. The stain looked fresh, like something had recently dripped onto the fabric. Rachel's experience with old historical items told her this might be important evidence of something the family had desperately tried to hide. The next day, Rachel spent her time at the British Library researching the Piton family history. Lord Reginald Piton had been a successful businessman who made cloth. He owned several factories in Manchester. The family had started out middle class but became very wealthy during the time when lots of new machines were being invented. They bought their fancy estate in the Cotswolds in 1885. Lady Charlotte Pemberton née Whitmore had married into the family in 1878. Her background was much more mysterious. She seemed to have no recorded family history before her marriage, which was really unusual for someone marrying into such an important family. Victorian society was usually obsessed with knowing about people's families and social status. The most disturbing discovery came when Rachel looked through old newspaper files. She found a bunch of articles from a local newspaper called the Gloucester Echo. These articles were from between 1896 and 1899, and they reported on a series of unexplained accidents involving house servants at Peaton Manor. 3 different maids had suffered mysterious injuries to their hands and arms that all needed medical treatment. 2 of them had quit their jobs suddenly, saying the working conditions weren't safe. One article from March 1898, just a few months before the family portrait was taken, reported that a young kitchen maid named Mary Fitzgerald had been found unconscious in the manor's kitchen with severe burns on both hands. The official story was that it was an unfortunate accident with boiling water, but Mary had apparently told the local doctor that her injuries weren't from water at all. Mary Fitzgerald had died 3 weeks later from infection. Her family had been paid an unusually large amount of money to keep quiet about what happened. Rachel was determined to find out the truth. She contacted Dr. James Whitfield, a local historian who specialized in Victorian medical records. His great-grandfather had been the village doctor in the 1890s and had kept detailed notes about his patients. These notes had been saved in the family's collection of papers. Dr. Whitfield met Rachel at a tea shop in Chipping, Camden. He brought a leather-bound journal filled with his ancestors' careful handwriting. "My great-grandfather was very thorough," he explained, opening the journal to entries from 1898. "He wrote down everything, even when families wanted to keep things quiet." The entries about the Peaton household staff were deeply troubling. The doctor had treated multiple servants for what he described as chemical burns of unknown origin. These burns always involved the hands and arms. His notes suggested these were not accidents, but deliberate injuries caused by someone who had access to dangerous chemicals. The most revealing entry was dated September 15, 1898. "Called to Peaton Manor to examine Lady Charlotte's hand. Strange injury beneath her glove. Appears to be self-inflicted burn, possibly from acid or lye. Patient refuses to explain cause, claims accident while gardening. Children present seemed frightened. Advised immediate medical attention, but Lady Charlotte insisted on treating wound herself. Most concerning case I've encountered." Dr. Whitfield looked up seriously. "My great-grandfather believed Lady Charlotte was deliberately injuring herself and others, but he could never prove it. The family's influence prevented any official investigation. The timing of this injury just before their family portrait suggests she was trying to hide evidence of her actions." Rachel's research took her to the records of Peaton Industries, the family's cloth-making business. In the company files housed at the Manchester Industrial Heritage Centre, she discovered that Lord Reginald's factories had been experimenting with new chemical processes for fabric dyeing and treatment in the 1890s. Among the business letters, she found bills for large quantities of sulfuric acid, sodium hydroxide, and other dangerous chemicals, delivered directly to Peaton Manor, not the factories. The amounts were far beyond what would be needed for normal household purposes, like cleaning or laundry. A letter from a chemical supplier dated June 1898 raised red flags. "Lord Peaton, we must express concern about the repeated orders for concentrated acids delivered to your private residence. Our liability insurance requires us to inquire about the intended use of these substances, particularly given their dangerous nature when handled improperly." Rachel also found employee records showing that an unusually high number of house servants quit their jobs between 1896 and 1899. Most telling were the resignation letters. Many of them mentioned concerns about working conditions and fear for personal safety. Several mentioned that Lady Charlotte had taken to spending long hours in the manor's basement, which had been converted into what she called her chemical laboratory. The pieces were forming a horrifying picture. Lady Charlotte Piton had been using her husband's access to industrial chemicals to conduct cruel experiments on the household staff. Her own hand injury was either an accident during these activities or a deliberate self-inflicted wound to test her methods. Armed with her research, Rachel contacted the current owners of Piton Manor, which was now a fancy hotel. The manager, Mrs. Elizabeth Davies, was fascinated by the historical investigation and agreed to show Rachel the basement areas of the building. The basement had been updated for hotel use, but original Victorian features remained in what had once been the wine cellar. Mrs. Davies pointed out unusual staining on the stone walls and floor, dark patches that had resisted decades of cleaning attempts. Previous owners mentioned finding strange equipment down here during renovations in the 1960s. Mrs. Davies explained. Glass containers, metal instruments, things that seem more suited to a laboratory than a wine cellar. Everything was thrown away, unfortunately. But Rachel's trained eye spotted something the renovators had missed. Behind a newer wall, she found scratches in the stone that appeared to be initials. CP 1898. Followed by what looked like tally marks, dozens of small scratches grouped in sets of 5. Most chilling was a section of wall where the stones showed evidence of acid damage, creating pockmarks and discoloration. The pattern suggested repeated splashing or deliberate application of corrosive substances. Rachel photographed everything, her hands shaking as she realized she was standing in what had likely been Lady Charlotte's torture chamber. Hidden in a crack between stones, Rachel discovered a small glass bottle that had been overlooked for over a century. Though empty tests would later confirm it had once contained concentrated sulfuric acid, the same chemical that had likely caused the injuries to the household staff and Lady Charlotte's own gloved hand. Rachel's investigation led her to the descendants of the Piton household staff. Through church records and local family history groups, she traced the families of several servants who had worked at the manor during the 1890s. What she discovered painted a picture of systematic abuse that had been covered up by wealth and social influence. Mary Fitzgerald's great-great-granddaughter, Sarah Murphy, still lived in the village. She had letters that Mary had written to her sister before her death, describing her experiences at Piton Manor. The letters had been kept secret for generations. The family had been too frightened of the Piton name to speak publicly. Aunt Mary wrote that Lady Charlotte would call her to the basement pretending she needed help with cleaning or organizing. Sarah explained, holding the fragile letters with shaking hands. But once down there, terrible things would happen. Lady Charlotte would force the servants to put their hands in bowls of liquid that burned like fire. She claimed she was testing cleaning solutions, but Mary knew it was deliberate cruelty. Another letter described Lady Charlotte's behavior. The mistress takes pleasure in our pain. She watches our faces as the burning begins, and I swear I see satisfaction in her eyes. She makes notes in a book about how long we can endure the pain before crying out. Yesterday, she burned herself with the same liquid just to see if she could bear it longer than I could. The final letter, written just days before Mary's death, was the most haunting. I fear I will not survive much longer. The infection from my burns grows worse daily, and Lady Charlotte refuses to allow proper medical treatment. She says the pain is necessary for scientific understanding. I pray someone will one day expose her wickedness. Rachel shared Mary Fitzgerald's letters with Dr. Sarah Chen, a forensic expert who specialized in historical cases. Dr. Chen's analysis of the described injuries and symptoms painted a clear picture of systematic torture disguised as household accidents. The pattern described in these letters is consistent with deliberate chemical burns, Dr. Chen explained in her London office. The progression of Mary's infection suggests her wounds were repeatedly contaminated, possibly by forcing her to continue working with damaged hands. Lady Charlotte appears to have been conducting cruel experiments on pain tolerance and wound healing. Dr. Chen examined high-resolution photographs of the family portrait, focusing on Lady Charlotte's gloved hand. consistent with severe scarring from acid burns. The way she's positioned her hand suggests she's hiding significant disfigurement, likely self-inflicted to test her own pain tolerance against that of her victims. The forensic expert also noted subtle details Rachel had missed. Tiny specks on Lady Charlotte's dress that appeared to be burn holes from acid splashes, and a slight discoloration on her right hand that suggested recent chemical exposure. This woman was clearly suffering from what we would now recognize as sadistic personality disorder, Dr. Chen concluded. She got pleasure from causing pain and used her social position to avoid consequences. The family portrait was taken shortly after her own injury, possibly as a way to create a normal image before the evidence of her activities became too obvious to hide. The glove wasn't just hiding a physical injury. It was hiding the evidence of Lady Charlotte's true nature as a serial torturer. Rachel's final breakthrough came when she discovered letters between Lord Reginald Patton and his lawyer, found in the legal firm's old files. The letters from late 1898 revealed that Lord Reginald had become aware of his wife's activities and was desperately trying to contain the scandal. "My wife's condition has gotten worse beyond my ability to manage," he wrote to his lawyer. "The household staff live in terror, and I fear her experiments will eventually result in a death that cannot be explained away. I have talked with Dr. Morrison about possible treatments for her mental illness, but she refuses all help." The lawyer's reply was equally revealing. "Given the recent death of the Fitzgerald girl and the questions from her family, I strongly advise removing Lady Charlotte from the household immediately. The payments to the victims' families have been substantial, but our ability to keep them quiet is limited. Consider a long stay at a private mental hospital." But Lord Reginald's later letters showed his unwillingness to put his wife in an institution, fearing the social scandal. Instead, he chose to move the entire family to their London house and sell Piton Manor, claiming Charlotte's health required a change of climate. The family portrait, Rachel realized, had been taken as a final formal image before their hasty departure from the Cotswolds. Lady Charlotte's gloved hand was hiding not just her physical scars, but the evidence of crimes that would have destroyed the family's reputation forever. The dark secret beneath the glove represented a systematic campaign of torture that had been covered up by wealth, privilege, and Victorian society's willingness to ignore the suffering of servants. 6 months after her discovery, Rachel stood before a packed auditorium at the National Archives presenting her findings about Lady Charlotte Patton and the dark secret hidden beneath her glove. The family portrait, now properly understood, served as evidence of one of Victorian England's most successfully concealed serial abuse cases. Sarah Murphy, Mary Fitzgerald's great-great-granddaughter, sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face as Rachel revealed the truth about her ancestor's death. "For over a century, our family carried the shame of Mary's supposed clumsiness with kitchen accidents," she said afterward. "To finally know the truth, that she was murdered by her employer, brings both pain and relief." The Piton Manor Hotel agreed to put up a memorial plaque honoring Mary Fitzgerald and the other victims, making sure their suffering would not be forgotten. The basement where Lady Charlotte conducted her experiments was turned into a small museum about the hidden lives of Victorian house servants. Dr. Chen published a medical paper analyzing the case, helping people understand historical patterns of serial abuse. Rachel's investigation had uncovered not just one woman's crimes, but the systematic way Victorian society protected the wealthy while ignoring the suffering of the powerless. As Rachel looked at the family portrait one final time before it was donated to the museum, she thought about how a single detail, an elegant glove hiding horrific scars, had revealed a truth hidden for over a century. Lady Charlotte's dark secret was finally exposed, bringing justice to victims whose voices had been silenced by class, money, and society's willingness to look away from uncomfortable truths. The glove had hidden more than physical damage. It had concealed a monster,